digitaljamsessions.com. Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we are joined once again by Gemma from Ogilvy, also the host of Science Disrupt. And we also have with us Nick from, and I'm going to pronounce this entirely wrong, but Enator? Did I get it right? Is it Enator?
You did, Enator, yeah.
Awesome. And we have with us as well Rachel, formerly from Apps World. So, hi guys, and welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. What I'd like to do is to ask you all to just introduce yourselves and explain a little bit more about what you do. Now, I'm going to start with you, Nick, just because I think what you're doing is really fascinating, but does require a little bit of explanation. Would you like to tell us all about your lovely new product?
Sure. Yeah, it's a sort of revolutionary technology in the kind of foot insole world. So it's under the new brand name of Enator. My background is I was with P&G for about 18 years, but I've just come out of that to sort of run this business. I'm taking over from my parents-in-law, and we've been on quite a sort of exciting journey for the last couple of months where we've been trying to get a big global sponsor, and we've signed up Usain Bolt as our headline sponsor, and we're a few weeks off from launch, so it's all pretty exciting. But it's a technology that basically can help you kind of run faster, jump higher. It's got this energy return sort of property in it. So we're trying to reposition the whole category away from, there's loads of health benefits, but away from just being about health and about health plus, so health plus performance. So that's what we're trying to do.
Awesome. And Rachel, why don't you explain to us a little bit more about your history in terms of events and the events that you have been working with?
Now I'm an event marketing consultant, so that's kind of looking from the technologies that are hot in the area and being disruptive and bringing them to large-scale audiences. And Apps World is an ever-evolving topic in the app space. And as we went through that journey over the 2 years, wearables was becoming a really key subject areas, especially in the startup, as well as the big business communities, and kind of bringing those two together as an ecosystem and getting those topics out there from, both areas, and kind of, I guess, where Nick's kind of been evolving his technology and moving into the wider space. So my background is kind of pulling those together as agenda and, showcasing these to wide-scaled audiences and making sure the key messages are heard and seen.
Wonderful, thank you. And Gemma, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing at Ogilvy?
Yes, so I'm what's called a tech innovation strategist, and I work for the R&D innovation team inside Ogilvy, which is called Ogilvy Labs. And our job is basically to look outside the world of advertising into tech, science, future ideas, art, whatever, and bring back everything that's interesting, everything that we should care about, and translate that back into our business and to our clients. So I spend a lot of time thinking about what's the future of robots or artificial intelligence. Wearables has obviously been a big area that we've been looking at over the past few years. And so there's a lot that we've been looking at in terms of our brands, but also in terms of how marketing can link in with the world of wearables.
Wonderful, thank you. So what I want to talk about today is this, we've kind of said the word quite a few times already, but this future of wearables and this evolution, if you like, of wearables, because I find it fascinating that we're now at a stage where a product similar to what Nick is talking about here in terms of this very scientific product. I mean, we're talking about a material, a smart material that's, and I'm quoting from your website here, Nick, a smart material that cushions the foot when moved slowly, but on impact locks together to absorb and disperse energy before instantly returning to its flexible state. Now, what we're talking about here fundamentally is science. And I am very interested that what we've come from is this idea of a wearable being something you kind of slap it on your wrist, or you put it on your head, or you're putting something onto your body that is very bulky and very obvious that it is, a wearable in inverted commas. But I feel like we're moving now towards this much more sleek evolution of what wearable really means. So I'm curious from your perspective, Gemma, of what that perception has shifted, from and towards in terms of wearable and your perception of wearable. And as much as, do you think it is becoming a little bit more sophisticated?
Yeah, I think there has been an evolution. As you said, it did start off this idea of, chucking something on your wrist which can give you alerts and it can tell you intelligent things about what's happening. And I think particularly from looking at it through an Ogilvy lens, we're seeing it more as an avenue for what we're calling micro moments or micro targeting. So it's especially if it's something on your wrist, when you think about, for instance, the Apple Watch, you've got this tiny little amount of real estate to provide a hell of a lot of information to people, whether that's health alerts, whether that's someone calling you, whether it's a branded message, whatever. So it's about working out what is most important to that person at a particular time. And these micro moments are, I guess, 4 to 7 seconds worth of attention. So what is it that we should be telling people or providing people, sort of debunking all the data that you could possibly, communicate to someone and give them it in a really useful way. So for me, the evolution is moving from measuring everything and giving people all of that information to thinking about what is it that people actually want at the right time and using different devices to provide them with that information. So whether it's health, whether it's service, whether it's alerts, whatever, it's about making sure you're really, really relevant and that you're not giving just crap loads of data.
So I'm interested then from your perspective, Rachel, in terms of this general kind of perception, if you like, of what wearables is all about. And I find it interesting that somebody like Apps World would evolve their offering and evolve their thinking to include wearables on the basis of all of this data, all of this information that these different types of technology are providing to us tend to end up being something that's displayed in an app or displayed on a mobile device in some way, shape or form. And with the types of technology that somebody like, Nick's company is providing, there's really no need for this necessary kind of relationship to the mobile device or the mobile technology. But I am curious to hear from your perspective what you feel the kind of consumer trend has been.
That's kind of the scale of it. I guess where it's all been tied in with wearables at the moment with Apps World is that the two interconnect. With wearables, you're always wearing it. And at the moment in the world, everyone has their phone on them. There's never a day where I've heard that someone doesn't have their phone on them. But you're right there. Where does the evolution go with wearables going into someone like Nick's company, where actually it goes into a bit more of the kind of wearables merging into a little bit, may I say, the biotech aspect of it, where we go a little bit more sciencey along those lines. Consumers, though, I think we're moving now into a new generation, I would probably say, of wearables, of what actually the customer, as Gemma was saying, of what do they want and scaling it up with the data, because our app is there to basically help with the data collection on a device with APIs such of where we can actually see the trends. I'm just trying to think of kind of the best way to explain it, actually, Tanya, in how we can, where Gemma's saying of the scaling and actually the use of actually an app being implemented now, it may be that actually wearables are going to take off. And it is, as I've seen the last few weeks, we've seen about the contact lens that's going to be produced. And that is going to be the brand new wearable of where will that data be stored for someone to see. It kind of opens a brand new kind of conversation avenue, really.
But then I suppose the question is there a more elegant solution to this whole notion of wearable? And I'm pointing this question at you very firmly, Nick, because you are at the cusp of something quite interesting, which is this type of wearable, this type of technology that it sits in this interesting middle ground space between what is traditionally biotech, what is traditionally fashion tech, and what is, ultimately wearable. And I am curious whether or not you think there is perhaps a more elegant solution to this, or a more elegant approach to this, where it isn't really about, I need a device that's going to have a display that's going to show me some data or some information, versus actually the technology will speak for itself. The technology will do whatever it's designed to do without having to then insert another layer of information. What's your sentiment on this?
I 100% agree on that. I think, to use a kind of an analogy in in another sort of tech industry is if you look at what sort of Amazon are trying to do now from their, how their business has evolved from selling books and CDs, etc., into a kind of, what they call a kind of an ecosystem, or, sort of no clicks they talk about now as a way that, is predictive and these kind of things. And so what I think we're finding is that technology is evolving, and it is becoming like almost, you don't need to notice it. It's kind of there in your lives, and it's starting to do things that, you just don't want to have to do. And I think where we see our fit into something like wearables is, everybody's trying to get an edge. Everybody's, I think there's a trend on health. I think everybody wants to do just that little bit better. And we see our product as, some cool technology that basically, does allow you to, put these things in your shoes. It gives you we've got some great claims about, the sort of injury reduction and the health benefits, etc. But then it also gives you this kind of little extra bit of boost in terms of its energy return, and helps you run a bit faster, and, gives you that edge in a game of football or whatever it is. And I think, that kind of, the evolution of our product, it will have things like, chips in and those kind of things that will actually be able to give you more than just that. But I think what you're finding is that people are wanting to have a sort of a collection, if you like, of different technologies that all talk to each other, that help them a little bit, and all those little things kind of add up. And I think that space is pretty exciting, because it feels like we're just kind of scratching the surface at the moment.
It's interesting, actually, because I went to an event a few weeks ago where somebody coined a phrase that I haven't seen in popular use yet, but I'm sure it'll emerge. And that was the Internet of Beings, and the idea of the human as the central focal point of decentralized energy. In this particular instance, it was decentralized energy. But it's interesting to note this idea that actually we're surrounding ourselves with technology and augmenting ourselves with technology that ultimately enhances performance or enhances the possibility of what we're doing. But I have to wonder, at what point do we reach this moral kind of ethical middle ground, or kind of the edge of what's acceptable in terms of this modification, in terms of this physically enhancing ourselves or physically adjusting ourselves. And I know that there's been the mention of the contact lens, and that's okay, fair enough, you're putting something into your eye. But at what point do we get to the point of these subdermal RFIDs or things that you're beginning to physically insert these things into your being? And I'm curious from your perspective, Nick, as to whether or not you feel that there is any moral kind of question or ethical question that you need to have a line that's somewhere drawn in that sand. When do we get to a point where, everybody's got an exoskeleton, or everybody's got, something literally being inserted into their bodies to help enhance their performance?
I don't have a big kind of moral dilemma on this one. For me, it's a kind of a, I think technology is an important thing. I mean, it's, since the Industrial Revolution or the invention of the wheel, or, all of these things, technology in itself is a good thing. Now, clearly, technology can be used for bad purposes as well. We know all the stories on all of those kind of things, but that's a choice of the individual or a government or whatever it is that are, using things in a bad way. I mean, I think it's up to the individual and organizations to use technology in a responsible way. But for me, there's not a big kind of moral dilemma of using technology that interacts better with our bodies and, helps us progress as people and as a society. For me, that's all okay. I guess, when you get to competitive sports and those kind of things, then yes, there are boundaries and, rules, and it needs to be a fair kind of level playing field. But technologies that can help us reduce injuries and those kind of things, for me, is great news, and we should try to promote that and foster it.
I think something to add on to that. I read this really interesting article recently, and it was talking about this idea of the moral question that comes with implanting technology into our bodies and blah blah blah. And it was saying, actually, what about the implant? Women have been inserting technology into their bodies for years to control their birth, the pregnancy, sorry. So really, wouldn't you say that controlling whether or not you have a baby is a much more, if you're talking about morals, much bigger question than how fast you run, or, how much strength you have, or how you control your health? I mean, surely, whether or not you can make a baby or not is a much bigger moral question. And if we're okay with that, then why aren't we okay with the idea of putting a chip in our brain?
It's interesting because I think there is this general acceptance of whether or not this general question of whether or not we accept technology. And I remember seeing a story where there was a particular company in London who had inserted a small chip into people's hands that was an RFID chip in it. And with that chip, basically, it lets you wave at the door to unlock the door. And if you want to use the vending machine, you just need to wave at it. And it's got all that information stored on the chip, essentially. But there was such a furor around the fact that they had done this and were encouraging this, and so many people's response was, no, thank you very much, you're not putting any technology into me, I don't want to be tracked in that way. And I find it quite interesting that there is still this kind of perception from a consumer point of view of just how far the technology should be allowed to go and how much is acceptable. And I'm curious from your perspective, Rachel, to understand whether or not you think that is something that's being reflected in things like app world or wearable world.
I would definitely, from what Gemma's point there and what you both just brought up there, is I think it's the narratives aren't correct right now. So you were just there, Tanya, talking about the chip in your hand and how there was uproar against it. I think that's from the narrative because it's the unknown to the consumer. I think if the narrative changed there, such as we've just brought up the implant as a basic technology, but if you said, well, this chip can regulate your diabetes for your mother and daughter, and in an emotional sense, I think actually it would change people's, from the consumer's point of view, their scope on it. I think it's the narratives that are going out in the industry right now that there's a fear factor probably to it. So to the apps world concept, I think if it's something that in a whole with apps, everyone can get access to them, and it kind of, you're going along that effect of, oh, you've got it, so I need it. So I think you need to look back from the starting journey, really, of how that would flow, such as, a positive narrative in such as wearables and tech for good, in who has access to that data for the consumer, how's this going to benefit them, how's it going to benefit the people closely surrounded to them, well, then overall will change that perspective from the general consumer concept, because if my next door neighbour's got it and they're doing something better than me, it's like, the Mrs. Jones kind of effect, I will want to do it as well. So kind of looking at it in that way, I'm kind of seeing your points there, and kind of that market just, in a way, just flow together because, when a brand new app launches, you will get it. Once you see people talking and updating about it, you get that gamification effect of, I've got to get it because they've got it.
It's interesting that we're at this stage where there are new emerging technologies just happening all of the time. Every single day, every single week, there seems to be some new company with some new tech, with some new scientific breakthrough that's doing something amazing. And from a consumer perspective, it is quite difficult to keep up with all of these different progressions, these different things that are hypothetically great for us or good for us. And I'm curious from your perspective, Nick, if you feel like there is a saturation point that we're at in terms of people's awareness and their willingness to necessarily get on board with these newfangled, wearable techs, or whether it's, something you put on your head or something you put on your wrist or something you put in your shoe. Do you feel like there is perhaps a certain degree of fatigue that's beginning to emerge, perhaps with this generation?
My personal view would be the opposite to that. I think that there is more appetite for these kind of things. I mean, I think with any new technology, you have early adopters, and the point was made before around when other people see other people using it, and that then brings them on board. And I agree with you. I think there is a lot going on, and there's some great new things that are coming out, and maybe it's hard for all of these different technology companies to get and for us included, get our message through that we've got something that's worth looking at. But I don't think from a consumer point of view, the appetite is on the wane. I think if anything, there's a hunger to, to find the best technologies. We do quite a lot of stuff in China and things, and you just see the pace of change, the pace of technology is just moving so fast that the consumers and especially the younger generation are just reacting to things in a very different way. I mean, an example on, if you look at just the sort of the number of people going into sort of traditional shops now, I mean, it's, the footfall's been down in China in the last 6 months by 15% as people are just buying more and more online and using their phones and paying between each other. And, they see technology as 100% part of their lives. They don't really see it as a kind of it's just embedded. It's totally embedded, and it's very different, I think, from at least my generation, and even what we see in the kind of, in Europe and in the States and stuff. It's just a lot, and I think that will continue. I think the more people see technology as just part of their everyday existence, and they expect a lot more from it. If your app doesn't show the Uber car for your pizza arriving, it's not a great service. It's that kind of generation that just feels like everything should be real time, have all the knowledge, make it super easy, don't want to have to click on anything, just make it happen. And if you don't, there are other people that are offering that. So I think you're right in that sense. There's lots going on, and it's very competitive. But I think the thirst for great technology is growing.
So on that basis, because I think you are right in as much as there is definitely that kind of need for something new, something that's going to be streamlined and easy, and there is always that demand, isn't there, to kind of make it as simple as practically possible. But I am curious, therefore, to understand from your perspective what you think needs to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, and what that significant thing is that's going to happen, that's going to change the face of how you do business, and whether that is a technological shift or a cultural shift. I'm curious to understand from your perspective what that thing will be. And you kind of already started on that explanation, Nick, but I'd like to kind of explore that a little bit more with you.
Yeah, I mean, there are big changes in terms of how we're doing business. I mean, as I say, people are just not, the loyalty in shops is at an all-time low. So we're having to explore different models and different ways of reaching consumers and shoppers. So, we have obviously sort of a direct-to-consumer website, but we're looking at, all the full sort of range of different approaches, and as well partnering with, our sort of mainstream customers, like, whatever a Superdrug would be launching in the UK. But yeah, so we're looking at the whole sort of gamut in terms of how do we reach people, and I think again we're trying different marketing techniques. I'd say for the UK we're trying a very traditional sort of big bang marketing, TV, all that kind of stuff, whereas in the States we're very much going on building a tribe and trying to find those people out there that are interested in technology and want to do a bit better and start to work it on that basis. So for me, fundamentally, we have to find different ways on connecting with people and trying to understand where they are in their lives, what their sort of needs are, and trying to kind of match that in both in terms of technology, but also just in overall approach as a brand or as a business, because I think the expectations are a lot higher, and I think you can add in a lot more than just technology. So again, we're trying to do this sort of social stuff around encouraging people to, we call it break their limits. So this thing does help, but it's not, it's not going to be technology alone that's going to help them. A bit like sort of, Weight Watchers program or something. It's not, it's a magic
solution, clearly.
Yeah, exactly. So it needs an attitude, and I think you're seeing that from consumers. You see people wanting to do better, wanting to get healthier, wanting to do, and I think, more so now, there's opportunities for other companies that probably in the past would have stayed, on their own, but to partner up. We look at Fitbit as a sort of a great partner, because we know we're going to have stuff that will interact. Sorry, I'm banging on a little bit, but I think that's really, it's a more sort of, maybe you call it mature or more social or more interesting marketplace where people are much more connected, and they want more than just products. They want a relationship. They want something that helps them, and they find fun and all of those kind of good things.
I think it's interesting because in some ways this whole kind of Internet of Beings thing is possibly on point, this idea of bringing the human being back to being the centric point rather than the brand. But I'm curious, Rachel, to hear your perspective on what you think is going to be that significant shift in the next 5 or 10 years.
I think it's kind of maybe using wearables to make us more of a fully connected universe in a way. At the moment, we can see the big shift here of, such as the UK, it's the US, it's China. But what about these emerging countries such as, we've got Brazil, Africa? How can they use wearables to help benefit them as countries of, is it a piece of technology that, I don't know, is something implanted in them that helps wear off malaria or some of these other viruses, and going along wearables along there? I think that there may be a bit of a shift in the culture and how companies work with countries, as well as the products that have made and the access to it. So all together as a world, we are fully connected through the technology, and that could be wearables.
Okay. What about you, Gemma? What's your thought on this? Do you feel it is this idea of the connected wearable Internet of Everything?
I think from my perspective, and it kind of goes back to what you're saying about this Internet of Beings, I think that's where it links into wearables, because actually the wearable, in my mind, helps take you away from being consumed by your phone, by your computer, by a screen. So for instance, I think it came out yesterday, EasyJet just did this campaign where they're making trainers that the soles vibrate to tell you directions when you're a tourist. So you could say, hey, I'm in Barcelona. Yeah. I'd like to take an interesting route from here to the Sagrada Familia. And what's cool is, instead of walking around looking at your phone and go, I need to take the next left, you can just walk and enjoy. I mean, Barcelona is a beautiful city, so you want to be up and looking around. You don't have to just be at the tourist spots. So you get there and then your left foot vibrates to turn left, both feet vibrate to turn back if you've gone the wrong way, all that sort of thing. And the idea is that you're not looking at your phone. And it was the same when I'm not a massive fan of the Apple Watch, but when I was trialing it, the one thing that I really loved about it was the fact that I didn't look at my phone very often, because if I got a buzz for a notification, I'd flick my wrist, have a look and go, oh, someone sent me a message, cool, I can reply to that later. And then I carried on doing whatever I was doing. If it's my phone and it vibrates, I pick up my phone, I look at the message, I then go, oh, I wonder what's happening on Facebook. Oh, I wonder what's happening on Twitter. Oh, do I have any emails? And you're suddenly on your phone for 10 minutes just because it buzzed once. So you're kind of taken over by this device. It's sitting there in front of you, whereas a little buzz, you quickly look at it and go, do I need to deal with that? Yes or no? And move on with your life. So for me, it's kind of this idea of freeing us from technology and freeing us from too much information and too many devices and too many apps and technologies and whatever. And if we can do it cleverly, if we can create, I guess, whether it's a wearable, whether it's a platform, whatever, that combines everything, your Fitbit with your Enertor, with your whatever, pull it all together and only feed you what you need and when. That's where I see the real power of wearables, and where I see the real power of technology enhancing us as beings, as opposed to being a thing that almost controls us in some way.
Okay, I like it. Giving back a little bit of control to us. Okay. Well, as always, we like to offer our listeners a way to be able to follow you and find out a little bit more about what you're up to. So I'm going to invite you to share with us your social media handle of choice. And Gemma, since you have been with us before, why don't you share your social media handle of choice?
I am going to choose my personal one, which is G for Gemma, K for Karen, which is a middle name, and then Milne, MILNE, 1. So that's me, but if you want to be connected to either Ogilvy or my Science Disrupt podcast, both of those are on my profile, so check those out as well. Cheeky little promotion for three.
Have a listen to Science Disrupt. And Rachel, why don't you tell us what your social media handle of choice will be?
It is Rach Marketing, and updates are from Women in Tech, Code, apps, everything in tech, startups, and even a few drinks and tipples that are tweeted through there through my networking opportunities, or some sunny beaches in Devon, but tech everywhere.
Wonderful, thank you. And Nick, what about your good stuff? What would be your social media handle of choice?
Twitter or Facebook, just under Enetor, ENERTOR would be Wonderful. Great.
And when can we expect to see the new Enetor product on the market?
Well, it's actually 9 days away from launching. There's a countdown clock as we talk. So it launches on the 26th in the States, and then it will launch in Superdrug here in the UK on July the 1st.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. If you like what you heard and you'd like to hear more, then don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter at Digital Jam Ltd. I have been Tanya, the host of Digital Jam and the founder of the Digital Jam Sessions. DigitalJamSessions.com